Amongst Chicago in 1982, a series of citizens fell victim to poisoning and death after taking doses of Tylenol-branded acetaminophen capsules. At first, this led to confusion amongst those involved, spreading out further across the city, country, and eventually world as the deaths continued in seemingly unconnected circumstances. It was later found that the capsules had been laced with potassium cyanide, killing a total of 7 people at random. It is unclear how and when the tampering occurred, but those events that shook the world with such darkness changed how medication has been packaged to this very day, with new tamper-proof cases in place. But what is most horrifying about these seemingly senseless murders was that the culprit was never caught, and is likely still living amongst us, even now. We ingest so much throughout the course of the day, poisoning ourselves with too much sugar and salt as we indulge in items that we know are bad for our bodies. We smoke cigarettes, take drugs and drink alcohol, all things that poison in some way or another, full of ingredients we do not know or understand, but we do so because we feel comfortable in our surroundings, comforted by the mass production of those that create it. We take them because we believe we are safe. How would you ever know that the item you were putting into your mouth would be your last? My name is Luke Mordew, and this urban legend is poisoned Halloween candy. This urban legend pops up across the Western world, most notably in the USA, every October. It is a concern held by many with so much force that it is covered annually on social media and in the press. A simple Google search will bring up dozens of clips from news reports up and down North America as they discuss the dangers of Halloween treats. Halloween traditions have updated and evolved over the years from its old Irish roots. For one night only, we all attempt to get a good scare. People walk the streets in outfits far more monstrous and often far more revealing than what would otherwise be deemed socially acceptable. But none of that is as strange as the concept of taking sweets from strangers. The phrase, "never take candy from a stranger," is prominent in most societies, and yet, for one night a year, we let our children loose to knock on strangers' doors and request a trick or treat. We let our guards down, enjoying the festival of menace and fear that erupts along the streets of every town and city as we enjoy our plunder. It's funny, we ask for tricks or treats, yet we never expect the tricks to actually come. Our story will follow David and his son Leo as they step out into the night of Halloween, unaware of the horrors that lurk amongst the glow of the carved pumpkins in the window. Leo ran excitedly up the long street of his neighborhood, dressed in his brand new Black Panther outfit, holding his orange bucket with the face of a jack-o'-lantern embossed in the plastic. As he ran from house to house, his father, David, strolled behind to keep up with his excitable little legs. David was proud of his son for having the confidence to go to the doors with such ease. He had been too afraid to trick-or-treat every year before then, and it was only after witnessing the joy of A Nightmare Before Christmas the year before that the countdown to Halloween had been filled with excitement and anticipation. It was only after witnessing the joy of A Nightmare Before Christmas the year before that the countdown to Halloween had been filled with excitement and anticipation. David did not even need to go to the front door with his young son, standing at the bottom of the garden as he went and knocked himself, taking the sweets given to him before thanking them with his polite little smile and dashing back to his dad to show off what he had gotten. This had been the routine with every house before and would be the routine with every house after. "Stop eating all the sweets," David demanded, shaking his head with a knowing smile as Leo shoved a gummy treat into his mouth, explaining that they were so yummy while struggling to get his words out as he chomped away in the substance between his teeth. They agreed that he would stop eating them all until they got home, as David explained that he would only be disappointed when he got home to find he had hardly anything left because he had eaten so many. And whilst being engrossed in this conversation, the two had not even realised that they were being approached. It was George and Amy, David's friend from the neighbourhood, and his young daughter. Leo instantly ran ahead to Amy as they discussed their costumes and compared the sweets they had gathered, exchanging those they preferred to ensure a perfect haul to return home with. "Busy night?" George asked, starting up the usual conversation parents usually have when they catch up to their children's side. They talked about how lively it had been, how the kids are having so much fun, even going as far as to express an element of jealousy, annoyed that they never really got to experience the joys of Halloween in the UK when they were kids. Nothing like this anyway. "I remember going out as a mummy," David explained. "My mum literally wrapped toilet paper around me and taped it together." George laughed whilst the kids watched them with confused expressions, struggling to understand why he did not just go and buy a costume instead of wrapping himself up in toilet paper, a concept that must have seemed so strange to a child in the modern world. "Can we please go to the next house together?" Leo asked whilst Amy jumped up and down in excitement. "We were just about to go head back now," George replied, looking down at them with a smile. "But one more house can't hurt." The kids cheered with excitement as Amy grabbed Leo's hand, scurrying up the path together towards the set of houses up ahead. "Remember to only go to the houses with pumpkins in the window," David shouted as they walked behind them to catch up. Amy and Leo stopped outside of a house with a giant skeleton hanging out by the front door and 2 emptied pumpkins on the wall, glowing with their spooky faces by the battery-powered candle lights inside. "Can we go to this one?" Amy asked, whilst they enthusiastically pointed at the overdramatic decorations glistening in the windows. David nodded, allowing them to disappear up the driveway into the front door. "So how come you're on Halloween duty?" George asked, pulling a sweet from his pocket and munching away on it. "I thought I'd give the missus a night off. Halloween's more my thing anyway," David replied. "Well, it was. Now it's come to it. I'm knackered." George smirked. "Yeah, Amy's mum's working late tonight, so I'm left on duty to take her out. But we're calling it a night after this house. Got to get her bathed and in bed before I pass out." There they both stood, nodding away to each other while staring at the floor, both more eager to get home and relax than stand by the road engaging in small talk. They were surrounded by the sounds of children laughing and playing in the darkness, only drowned out for a moment by the loud calls of an ambulance siren blasting down the next street. As Leo and Amy came excitedly running up the pathway towards them, the two men took this opportunity to say their goodbyes, telling each other that they'd see them soon. Amy and Leo shared a hug and waved at each other's parents before joining the journey in 2 opposite directions. "Have you had fun?" David asked his son, who was now staring into the bucket with enthusiasm. "It was amazing," he replied with a joy that only a child on a holiday celebration could express. But David didn't notice this glisten of excitement. He was too busy focusing on the second ambulance he heard that night, now watching it speed up the road and into the distance, its blue lights flashing by as they passed them. He finally turned back to his son to carry on the conversation, but was distracted again by the fact that Leo had already shoved a couple of sweets into his mouth. David grabbed the bucket from him, laughing as Leo playfully gagged the moment he swallowed, complaining about how one was sour and bitter. With a smile, David turned to cross the road, putting out his hand for Leo to take so they could cross safely together. The air was filled with ghostly screams from the recordings of people's garden decorations still emitting from nearby houses. But now, something had changed. One of the screams sounded all too real from an all too familiar voice. David stood by the side of the road, his hand still out for Leo to take, his eyes darting to the top of the pathway in the distance. Leo called for his dad, a slight concern in his voice, but David continued to follow the sound of the screams until, finally, his worst fears had been confirmed. His eyes had now locked with George, who now sat on the pathway on the other side of the road in the distance. Little Amy was lying in his arms as several families darted towards them to help. He was screaming her name as if he had no idea what else to do. "Dad," Leo said again, the concern growing in his voice. David's eyes remained locked on his friend, unsure on what to do, as he kept his hand out for Leo to take. "It's okay, take my hand, come with me," he replied, trying to comfort his concerned son. still believing his concern was for what they were witnessing. It was only when he heard the words, "My stomach hurts," sharply followed by the thud of his body slamming down against the pavement, that David turned to find his son lying on the ground, his body convulsing as his eyes rolled to the back of his head. David screamed for his son in a tone that matched George across the street, diving down to lift his head from the concrete, instantly pulling out his phone from his pocket and dialing the emergency services. But as it rang, another scream called from a house across the road. David looked up to see a woman charge out of the front door of her house to the car in her driveway, an unconscious child in her arms. A man charged out of the house behind her, slamming the door shut and unlocking the car so the woman and child could slip into the back. The man jumped into the driver's seat and pulled out onto the road, crushing the jack-o'-lantern that sat at the bottom of their driveway, killing all suggestion of Halloween in that household. As they drove away, David gripped his son's dying body in his arms, holding him tight, trying to keep him awake. He didn't know what to do or what was happening. The screams of panicked parents seemed to be spreading all across the town, the air filling with the many sirens of the emergency services, as a pandemic of evil seemingly swept through the shadow of the streets. There are many variations of this urban legend, from the razor blades in the apples to syringes being pushed into sweets. Some even speak of cyanide or rat poison that the Halloween treats had been laced with. These stories leave parents checking through their children's sweets before eventually giving them back to enjoy once they've proven they're safe. Some are stopped from going out trick-or-treating entirely, concluding that it was not worth the risk. However, is there any foundation for this fear? As with many urban legends, the truth is a mixture of yes and no, lost amongst the grey, hidden between the black and white tales that spread across the globe. There's a slight egg in the chicken conundrum with this, with the legend itself predating some occurrences, bringing forward the notion that they were inspired by the story rather than the other way round. The fears of sharp objects hidden inside the sweets of our children's treats have haunted the USA for decades now, even now venturing out into the UK as the holiday grows here. But despite this, the first case of it, as it is known in some iterations of the legend, was as recent as the year 2000. It's an uncomfortable one to hear and a situation that I still would never wish to be in, although the cases are still relatively small compared to what the legends suggest is happening out there. James Joseph Smith in Minneapolis, USA, allegedly stuck small needles into Snicker bars that he later handed out to trick-or-treaters. Although this is enough to make us squirm and cringe at the idea of the few children that did bite into them, ultimately, only one teenager was pricked by a needle, and that prick was so small that it required no medical attention. Even so, James Joseph Smith was rightly charged with one count of adulterating a substance with intent to cause death, harm, or illness. On the very same night, Halloween of the year 2000, over in California, USA, several parents found Snicker wrappers that were stuffed full of marijuana. A lousy PR night for that brand of chocolate. This would, of course, be horrifying for parents to imagine, someone purposely handing out drugs to children without their knowledge. But it would later come to light that the truth was nowhere near as twisted as it first seemed. Once the police arrived at a man's home who had handed out the drug-filled wrappers, he was even more confused than the parents. It was eventually concluded that the man worked in a dead letter office at a local postal facility, and whilst there, he found a bag of Snickers in an abandoned package and brought them home as treats. What he had not realized was that somebody somewhere was trying to smuggle marijuana through the mail, and it had got lost along the way. This story was widely accepted and proven to be true, and no charges were brought against the man in question. On a darker occasion, and as recent as 2018, a 5-year-old boy in Ohio, USA, tested positive for methamphetamine after a night of trick-or-treating. It was widely considered that a sweet he had obtained on his travels had been laced with the highly addictive drug, and a sudden uproar swept the nation. Although it only took a couple of days for the truth to come out when the police arrested his father, charging him with possession of meth and evidence tampering. Police Chief Brian Satterfield stated, "While we cannot definitely say how the little boy ingested methamphetamine, we are extremely confident that he did not ingest any candy from Trick or Treat that was tainted." Ultimately, it seemed the child had ingested his father's drugs, and to cover his tracks, the father had used the belief in this legend. A consistent theme has played into the history of the genuine cases of this urban legend, edging so close to the dark stories we hear through the grapevine that happened to a little child in the next town over, but they never quite prove themselves to be as dark as they suggest. But if we go back further, venturing to the latter half of the 20th century, will what we find be as simple, or does the dark tale coincide with more truth than our recent stories suggest? Let us go back to Halloween night of 1959. The children were strolling up the streets of Glenmore Gardens residential neighborhood in California, dressed up in their spookiest outfits as they wandered door to door, hoping to find some sugar-filled treats they could take and demolish. It was only when they got home that things got strange. Some of the kids' parents found cause for alarm when they discovered heart-shaped, sugar-coated pills at the bottom of their children's bags. This resulted in the police checking 250 homes and eventually recovering 450 laxatives. The average dosage for an adult was 2, yet some children had as many as 30 placed into their bags. At least 16 children received pills, with 4 suffering stomach cramps and vomiting. It was lucky for all of them that the bitter taste that resided inside the aloe pills was so much that they ended up spitting them right out, resulting in none requiring hospitalization. Dr. William Shine was charged with outraging public decency and endangering the health of children, whilst the woman who stood alongside him giving out the candy to unsuspecting children, Hazel Engleby, was charged the same. Eventually, though, after months of denial, twists and turns in the court cases and legal loopholes, Miss Engleby was set free with no charges. Dr. Shine, on the other hand, was given a 4-month suspended jail sentence, 2-year probation, and a fine of $525. There are 2 obvious reasons that these 2 foolish individuals could have played such a dangerous game. Either with malice and ill intent, as many suggested was the case, or a prank that they genuinely believed would be funny. Perhaps they disliked Halloween and wanted to teach those who celebrated it a lesson. After all, many people hate the holiday, completely misunderstanding the beauty and true meanings behind its purpose. Either way, this story came close to a true example of this urban legend, but, as they usually do, it fell short of the tales of deadly poisoned candy we hear about so often. 5 years later to the very day, something equally as dark and stupid occurred on the night where the wall between the spirit world and our world is apparently at its thinnest. Elise Drucker, her sister Irene, and a friend were out in New York in the USA to gather the sweets they could during their trick-or-treating session of that year. They were teenagers, but still enjoying the spooky events and excitement that came from Halloween night. That was until they knocked on the door of Helen Feel, who answered and questioned their age, suggesting that they were a little too old to be trick-or-treating still. Helen, who had teenagers of her own, dropped some sweets into their bags and set them on their way. It was not until they got home that the sinister truth revealed itself as Elise and Irene's mother checked over the sweets they had gathered. Here, they found a bottle cap-shaped ant trap with a warning sign that read poison. According to sources, Helen was growing frustrated that so many of the trick-or-treaters that had gone by were what she deemed to be too old to be out asking for free sweets. And so, she made up packages of inedible treats to give to teenagers. These packages contained dog biscuits, steel wool pads, and ant buttons clearly marked as poison. And although foolish and twisted in its macabre humour, it is said that Helen did tell the teenagers as she handed them out that they were intended as jokes. And luckily, nobody was harmed by her idiotic prank. Even still, she pleaded guilty to endangering children and served a suspended sentence. With the event of these two pranks that were arguably more ill-judged than evil, the fears and rumours of tampered Halloween sweets had begun to sweep the nation. In 1971, the state legislature of Michigan put 10-year prison sentences and fines for those caught tampering with Halloween candy, most likely due to the most commonly told urban legend alongside these events, despite most reports proving occurrences to be hoaxes. But even though pretty much every occasion of it had been proven to be foolish pranks between friends and siblings, tricks where the repercussions and dangers were ill thought out and foolish rather than with devilish intent, it would all change on the Halloween night of 1974, when the tale of poisoned candy tragically and horrifyingly came true. If you're still with me, then I know you share the same passion for folklore and urban legends that drives this show. But to keep bringing you these stories, I need your help. Every season comes to life with the incredible support of listeners like you on Patreon. For just £3 a month, less than the price of a small coffee, you can help ensure that this show continues to thrive, with shorter breaks between seasons and even more content available. But that's not all. As a Patreon subscriber, you'll unlock exclusive perks like access to our bonus series, Modern Myths, where we dive into lesser-known but equally captivating tales like the Hodag, Black-Eyed Children, the Dark Watchers, and many more. You'll gain instant access to our entire library of bonus content the moment you join, with new chapters coming each season. You'll also get a behind-the-scenes look at how the show is made, discounts on merchandise, and an invitation to our private group chat, where you can connect with me directly and share your love for urban legends with a community of like-minded enthusiasts. Plus, as a special treat, I randomly select patrons to feature in upcoming stories, so you might find yourself becoming part of the very legends we explore. Supporting us on Patreon isn't just about subscribing. It's about joining a team dedicated to preserving and expanding on our collection of folklore. Your contribution directly fuels the research, production, and growth of the show, helping us continue this incredible journey together. So, if you're ready to take the next step and become an integral part of the Urban Legends community, head over to our Patreon page via the link in our show notes and choose the paid subscription. I'm looking forward to seeing you there, where we can keep these tales alive. And now, back to the legend. It was October 31st, and 8-year-old Timothy O'Brien was out trick-or-treating with his sister Elizabeth, chaperoned by their father Ronald, in Texas, USA. Even though it was raining, they were making good progress through the night as they excitedly ran from door to door, Ronald struggling to keep up with their little feet. They stopped at a house that didn't seem to be participating in the festivities of Halloween, but they waited nevertheless. After a moment or two, The children swiftly gave up, heading to the next house to get their treats. Once their father had caught up with them, he handed them 2 pixie sticks out of the 5 he held in his hand. If they had waited a moment longer, they would have been able to take the sticks themselves, as they had just missed the homeowner. The kids took them with joy, as Ronald gave the extras to 2 neighbouring children and the 5th to a child he recognised from his church. Before bed, as children often do after the excitement of Halloween, knowing their grand haul of a night's hard work is sitting so close to their reach, little Timothy asked if he could eat some of the sweets he had collected. Ronald agreed, and Timothy dove straight for the pixie sticks, but struggled to get the sherbet out of the straw. His dad happily obliged to help his son loosen up the powder, and he began to chug it back with childish glee. And although Timothy did mention that the sherbet tasted bitter, he finished it all down with the help of some Kool-Aid, also supplied by his ever-doting father. Within minutes, Timothy was in agony as his body began to convulse whilst violently vomiting. Within an hour, on the way to the hospital, 8-year-old Timothy O'Brien was dead. News spread fast of the Halloween sweets laced with poison, spreading fear and horror amongst the community of Deer Park, with several parents handing their sweets to the police in fear that they too had been tampered with. The autopsy of Timothy revealed that he was filled with a fatal dose of potassium cyanide. Robert confirmed that this must have been in the pixie sticks he'd received from the mysterious homeowner on Halloween night. Thankfully, the rest of the sticks that he'd handed out to the children on the street were successfully retrieved without any injury. It soon became clear that all 5 pixie sticks had been tampered with, opened at the top and refilled with cyanide before being resealed with a simple staple. The results from the lab confirmed that little Timothy's powder contained enough cyanide to kill 2 fully grown adults, whilst the other 4 contained dosages that could quickly kill 3 to 4 adults. Ronald desperately tried to help the police find the killer of his darling son, but he claimed to have forgotten which house it was that had handed him the sticks. He told them that he didn't see the homeowner's face, that they only opened the door a crack, and that a hairy arm had reached out and handed him the pixie sticks. But after walking with the police several times, Ronald finally confirmed the home that they had visited that night. This was the home of a man named Courtney Melvin, an air traffic controller who was not home until much later that night, as was confirmed by the hundreds of people who had seen him at the airport. This, admittedly already strange situation was growing stranger to the police as they began to throw their suspicious eyes at Ronald himself. It was strange that he would have forgotten what house it was, especially considering they had only visited 2 streets that night due to the rain. They decided to look further into Ronald's life and were surprised by many things. They learnt that he was over $100,000 in debt, the equivalent to over $500,000 today. He was a man that struggled to hold down a job, going through as many as 21 in the 10 years leading up to that moment. Even then, he had been suspected of theft at his current job at Texas State Optical and was expected to be fired shortly after. His car was close to being repossessed, he had the family home foreclosed on, and he had multiple bank loans falling into default. Times were tough, but then came the most damning part of the investigation. Ronald had taken out life insurance policies on both of his children in the months building up to Halloween night, even going as far as to take out another $30,000 5 days prior. With this, the policies totaled well over $60,000, all done without his wife's knowledge. It was also found that Ronald had even called his insurance company to inquire about the process of collecting the policies he had taken out on his children on the morning of Halloween. And as damning as all of this was, it only got worse for Ronald O'Brien when the police learned that he had visited a chemical supply store to buy cyanide not long before the events occurred. Once confronted, Ronald remained persistent in his innocence. Even so, the police had already begun to piece together the evidence that he had laced the sweets with poison to kill his children so he could claim on their life insurance policies. The consensus was that he gave the pixie sticks to the other children close by in an effort to cover up his crime, to make it seem far more random than it was. He was convicted of the crime with an overwhelming amount of evidence. Even a chemist testified that Ronald had contacted him regarding the cyanide, specifically about fatal doses. And soon enough, Ronald was sentenced to death. After this, Halloween was never the same again. Even though the public knew what had truly happened, the seed had been planted. The anxiety was now in their hearts whenever their children would come home with sweets from all sorts of dark corners of the neighborhood. Over time, this story became a part of history, drifting away into the back of people's minds. However, the anxiety stayed, and this led to changes in the story, additions and takeaways from the events. Before long, it had become nothing more than an urban legend about drugs in your children's sweets or needles and syringes. It took 10 years before Ronald was finally executed by lethal injection, when Timothy would have still been only 18 years old. The father, that the inmates had nicknamed the Candyman, was dead. And whilst this was happening, the crowds gathered outside the building, chanting the words, "Trick or treat."
Urban Legends is researched, written and produced by Luke Mordew. Original score by Billy Jupp, with additional sounds from storyblocks.com. If you like what you heard and want to hear more, click subscribe on your chosen podcast provider and delve into the mysteries of our previous and future chapters. To find more, including merchandise, video content, images and more, visit urbanlegendsfolklore.com. If you have more information or a correction on something mentioned in this chapter, please get in touch through our website. We aim to ensure that all information provided is accurate and up to date, and this remains a top priority. If you want to support the show, receive early access, and have more of a say in what we do, then become a patron by clicking the link in our show notes. For these chapters in video format, simply search Urban Legends Folklore on YouTube. Follow us on TikTok, Instagram, and Threads, and join our Facebook group by searching Urban Legends Folklore.